Hi friends, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to share a few different ideas for how you can use the Cousins weekly pages. If that sounds like something you'd be interested in, then I invite you to settle in with your journal or planner and a cozy beverage while we hang out and chat. And before I get into it, I wanted to talk about a recent experience that I had in Toronto, which was very special, and I guess I just wanted to document it. A few weeks ago, Wonder Pens, which is one of my favorite stationery stores in Toronto, hosted a workshop with the Superior Labor. And I did attend this workshop alone, so like the other few events at Wonder Pens that I've attended alone, I did feel a little bit nervous, but it's starting to feel a little more comfortable going to these events because it's always such a lovely, inclusive, and intimate setting that I don't feel too overwhelmed. So for this workshop, the Superior Labor created 3 canvas pouches. There was a pencil case, an A5 pouch, which is what this one is, and there was also an A4, I believe. I'm just double checking the website. Yeah, and then there was an A4 pouch. As soon as I saw these workshops and I saw how cute this little label was, I knew that I wanted to attend. And honestly, I loved how these pouches looked so much that I didn't even really want to paint over it. So I ended up keeping my design pretty minimal. We were given the pouches that we purchased for the workshop, so I decided to go with the A5. They brought a few different colors of paint. I think there was a blue, a yellow, a black, a white, and maybe a gray. And then they gave us painter's tape, let us have creative freedom in terms of taping over the parts we didn't want painted. And one of the most special moments was the fact that I was fussing around with the paints because I was originally going to go for a thick stripe, and then a thinner stripe, and then an even thinner stripe, and I was going to do that on the front and then on the back. And I was having trouble lining up my tape, and Makoto-san, I hope I pronounced his name right, came over and ended up helping me, and I ended up making these little marks to try to keep things consistent across this pouch. And I know this is a little bit extra, but he ended up using my guide and helping me. But I was so indecisive that I ended up changing my mind with the stripes because the way I had taped up this pouch, I knew there was going to be big gaps around the pouch, and I didn't think I was going to like that very much. So I kept this stripe, and then I pivoted, and I ended up making these checkers on the back. I'm actually really happy with how this turned out. They also brought a bunch of stamps, and I was so indecisive about what I wanted to stamp that I just picked one for here, and it might be hard to see because I didn't realize till I stamped it that I maybe didn't have enough ink on it. And because I couldn't decide, I ended up stamping a bunch of the others on the inside. I don't know if you can see that. So I got to play with their stamps. On the front here, they have this label, the Superior Labor and Wonder Pens, and then there's one of the Wonder Pens cats. On the back, it was just plain. I love this color of brown because I just love brown so much. I love this little label on the inside. It says, "The Superior Labor, we take pride in craftsmanship and never skimp on the end effort." So we put the paint on, and then they dried the paint for us, and then once we removed the tape, we were able to stamp. I will say as well, there were some really creative ideas that if I had seen before I ripped off my tape, I might have approached this differently. And there was one person who left the tape on and then stamped all over, so when they ripped the tape off, it kind of looked like a newspaper clipping or something. It was so great. There was also someone who took the tape and made mountains and used different paint colors to depict the mountains. That was also so good. Somebody else even brought their own print block, I think it's called, and put paint on it or maybe ink, and was able to put their print right on the back. That was super creative. And honestly, even if I had bought this pouch completely plain, I would have loved it. So after we were finished with the pouches, they added on this little pull, which has this cute fountain pen on it. And then they gave us this tag, which is apparently a bookmark. So that's really exciting. I love the touch. And then because I signed up a little bit early, they also gave this brass clip. It has like Wonder Pen's etching on it. So it says Standard and Strong, the Superior Labor, made in Japan, and then it says Toronto, Canada, Wonder Pens. So this was such a special experience. I'm so grateful that I was able to do it. I did feel extremely nervous on my way to the event because I was feeling, I don't know, going to these events can always be kind of intimidating, but it was such an amazing moment to be able to meet the Superior Labor team. So it was Makoto-san, Yoshimi-san, and their two daughters who were helping out. Wish that I had filmed a bit more of it so I could remember it, but I also wanted to be in the moment and enjoy my time with the other people who attended the workshop. And then some TSL candies or mints, I'm not really sure. So that was my Superior Labor Wonder Pens workshop experience. 10 out of 10. I really hope they do more like this again in the future. I know it's a really long way for them to travel to Toronto, but I'm assuming because they were already coming to North America for Stationery Fest. We're not too far from New York, so I'm really glad they were able to come visit us in Toronto as well. And I just love this pouch so much. I love this cat. I cannot wait to use it. This is leather that I think is going to darken over time, and I don't know if this is the same leather, but this is also the Superior Labor leather, so it's really cool to see the difference. I was curious to see, yeah. So it definitely fits an A5 book really nicely. Just gonna put this stuff away now. Just in case you're new here, I started off this year using the Cousin and my traveler's notebook with a blank insert as my planning system. And then about a few months ago, I ended up switching my system from the Cousin into Hobonichi Original, so the A6. And I was using the weekly spreads in this style when I was in the Cousin. So I would have all of my meetings for the week highlighted and I would color code them depending on what it pertained to. And then I would add in things throughout the week like workouts or people that I saw that, you know, non-work related events. And then at the bottom, I would log what I had for lunch and dinner. I ended up downsizing into this weekly supplement. And it was a big shift, but I've actually come to love this so much because I love how compact it is. I've realized that it's just enough space for remembering all of my events. And the other thing that is kind of hard to show you on camera, but I have my laptop propped up on a stand and I actually keep this open and I prop it on my laptop. So throughout the day, I always have a place to reference my schedule. And I really like that. And that is why I've come to appreciate having the weekly supplements separate from my main Hobonichi Original, which I use for my to-do lists and short notes for the day. Once I started putting my schedule in here, that meant that I didn't need to use these weekly pages for this purpose anymore. And I took that as an opportunity to experiment with different ways to use this weekly page. When I mentioned downsizing from the Cousin to the A6, I also got a lot of really great suggestions on how I could use these weekly pages moving forward. So thank you everyone for those suggestions, and I felt really inspired to try some of them out. The first one is how I was already using the Cousin. In this top area, I used the times down on the side exactly as they are, and I would put in the events that I already knew had coming up. So On the Sunday before the week started, I would sit down, I would double check my calendar, and then I would put all my meetings in. And then this would stay open on my desk, and I would reference that throughout the week. And because this stayed open on my desk, that's why I would log my lunch and dinner in the bottom, because even though I do have a meal planner where I plan out our dinners for the week, I leave that in the kitchen and I don't access that on a daily basis. So it made more sense to me and it was easier for me to log that information here. And then on the side, I would put important events that I knew were coming up that week. And I do the same thing in here. I'm just going to shift this over. The second spread is what I'm going to call the weekly dashboard. In my experimentation with downsizing to this book, I realized that I didn't actually need as much room as I thought I did in the Cousin. And so in my weekly supplement, I've renumbered this space from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. And I think the original, I've already renumbered all of them, but I think this used to be a 24-hour time. So you would have one square for every half-hour block. And I didn't like that at first because some of the meetings are half an hour long, some of them start the half-hour mark, and it was really hard initially for me to move over to here until I renumbered this. And then once I renumbered it, I realized it's almost the same amount of rows here. So in this layout, I've removed the original numbers. So here it goes from 5 a.m. until 4 a.m. So I removed all of those, and then I rewrote from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. across the top of this page. And then I've used this in the same way that I used over here, except it's more condensed. And then down here, I use this as a to-do list space. And normally my to-do lists are very detailed. I like to add as much detail as possible. But when I moved over to the Hobonichi original, I realized that my to-do list, the space that I was using for my to-do list is about the same number of squares. So let me see if I can find an example. So this space here that I'm using mainly for my to-do list is about the same width. And so I thought, well, what if we just combined these two things into here? And it worked out really well, but there are days when I have such a long to-do list that I do end up needing more room in my original. But for this particular example, it did work out pretty well. And then on the left-hand column here, I had some extra space, so I added in my lunch and dinners for that week. And there is a little bit of space here for important weekly tasks. I thought this was a really nice way to have a lot of information here. This actually reminds me a bit of the dashboard that Danielle from My Dandelion Diaries was experimenting with earlier this year. Hers has a lot more information packed into it, but the idea of it in general, just putting a lot of stuff in here and referencing this throughout the week, I really like how this spread turned out. I think it's very functional, but it did take me a long time to set this up because I ended up whiting out all of the timelines. And I know I probably didn't have to rewrite them all, but I like being able to reference them. I just think it's just easier for me to, reference a meeting here as opposed to, always trying to look over here. So I would have had to whited all of this out, which I know I could have gotten one of those whiteout tapes, but that's one thing. Then I would have had to write these all out. I don't think I'm willing to do this amount of setup every week, but I'm really glad I tried this out, and I do think it could work. The next idea is a health and wellness tracker. So I currently use a Hobonichi Weeks as my health and wellness tracker, and it works out really well. On the left-hand column, I track the weather and the high and average temperature of that day. In this column, I put the mood, my mood and feelings. So I rate it on a star system, and then if I have a specific feeling in mind, then I will put it underneath. Here I just add any notes Usually things that go in here are like how I'm feeling. I've been dealing with a really bad eczema skin breakout, for example. So often I will log how my skin is doing on my notes page just so I can keep track of how that's going. And then I do my habits on the top of the right side page. I have a chart for sleep. I have a chart for mood. It is repetitive, but I like seeing it visually like this. And then I also have a space at the bottom of the right-hand page in the weeks to add my notes and reflections of the week. And these notes and reflections are typically related to my mood or how I'm feeling that week. So in this spread, I basically took all of that information and I played around with trying to put all of that in here. So in the top, I've got my weather, I've got my sleep and my mood, but this time they are together. I've got my feelings here. I threw in my breakfast, lunch, and dinner because I don't know why I like tracking what I eat. It's not a portion thing or a calorie thing. It's just interesting information for me, I guess. I also have a section here for chores because I've realized that I do not need a separate book to track my chores, and I thought it could be interesting to just have a space during the week for the chores that I need to have done. And then a notes page. So whatever notes I would have made in that column, I just put them down here. And then over here, my intention was to put the habits I was tracking. I didn't feel at the time like rotating my book to do my habits this way because I like, if I'm filling this out, I like the idea of just being able to keep my book orientated in the same way. So I tried out making a key and then putting that up here. And this just took so long. I wouldn't really recommend it. If I did try to do something like this, I probably would just flip it sideways like I've seen it done before, because that does make the most sense. The next spread that I played around with was a word of the day. So all of these words I got from worddaily.com, and I would put the word of the day at the top. I would put the definition of it underneath, share an example sentence that was supplied by Word Daily. I would put in the origin and then more information about this word. So I thought this was really nice. I always feel like my vocabulary is stunted, so I like the idea of learning new words and expanding my knowledge. I also think this would be a great layout for language learning. So if I was trying to learn a different language, I could do the same thing by putting in a word of whatever language I'm trying to learn, and then maybe writing down what it is, trying to write it out in a sentence, that kind of thing. The next one is kind of inspired by some of the suggestions that you gave me in some of my previous videos, so thank you again. I ended up doing a kind of mix of daily gratitude and pick of the day. So under daily gratitude is exactly as you would expect. I would write down one thing that I was grateful for that day. And then I did that in one color pen. This was the Pilot Iroshizuku Tsukushi. And then I would use my marker to block off when I finished the gratitude. And then I went through my phone and I would look at the pictures that I took from that specific day. And then I would pick one of them and I would describe it. So I would describe the photo and then I would talk about why I was picking that as my pick of the day. And I just really liked it because I think this was my favorite spread out of all the experiments that I tried, because it allowed me to scroll back on my phone and give me an opportunity to remember some of the photos that I took the time to take. Because with digital photos, sometimes I have a tendency to take photos and then forget about them because I know they're in my photo stream. Whereas back when we used to print photos, it was like you would take the photo, you would get the photos developed, and then you would have an opportunity to see those photos again and relive those experiences that inspired you to take the photo in the first place. So I really loved this reflection activity and being able to go back and remember things. So This is another spread that I very much enjoy doing. You could definitely do this if you use the daily pages for journaling. I'm sure you could integrate this in here, but I like this activity so much that I think I might find a place to do this next year. The final spread is a memory keeper. So I wanted to try using the weekly for memory keeping. I know a lot of people do this. I've seen some really creative and beautiful spreads, and I think I just wanted to try it for myself. So the only mistake that I made in putting this together was I printed all my photos on sticker paper, but I accidentally printed it on the non-sticky side. So I ended up having to tape some of these down, and I don't know, that was just a silly mistake. But I thought it'd be cool to treat these as blank pages and put pictures everywhere and then just write about them. So over here I've got a quiche recipe that corresponds to this quiche that I made during this week. It's become a staple in our meal plans because it's easy, doesn't require a lot of ingredients, and it's really flexible in terms of what you put in the quiche mixture. Here's a photo of Coconut looking really miserable, and he's always featured in my photo streams. So I wrote a little bit about this bath we gave him and how miserable he looked and how he was kind of glaring at me. Here is when I met a friend for a coffee downtown. It was such a nice catch up and I wanted to remember that. This was a photo of one of the videos that I did that talked about different ways of using my Hobonichi weeks. This is a photo of Coconut cuddling with me. He loves humans because they give him food, but he is not a cuddle dog. So the fact that he put his head on my lap one day after a run, I did beg Mike to take a photo of it right away. And of course, as soon as he took the photo, Coconut moved. But anyway, that was such a memorable moment. This was a photo of me having lunch with my parents at one of our go-to Chinese restaurants in Toronto, although I think this one was actually in Mississauga. This is from my parents' garden, and then this was just a really funny photo of Coconut, who always likes to take over spots when we move. So I like to sit on the floor a lot when I work on my coffee table, and I put a blanket down, and as soon as I got up to get some water, I turned around and he was in my spot. So I think it's really cute that he always likes to steal our spots. So anyway, I really enjoyed this. Just like that other page where I described the pick of the day, doing this allowed me to go through my photo stream, pick some photos to print, and write about it. And it was really fun to break out of the spread. Like you can see the progression where I start with this is how I think Hobonichi intended for us to use it, to still sticking within kind of the lines and keeping it related to scheduling. And then here's still using it as like a tracker. And then all of a sudden I'm like, well, this is all text, but I'm still kind of keeping within the lines. And then here I'm just ignoring the lines and going really creative. So I actually thought this was a great activity as well for trying different things and then slowly building up that muscle to try and experiment in new ways each time. And then this spread did take the longest to put together just because I had to pick the photos and I was fussing around like how I wanted to place them on the page. So while I had a lot of fun doing this, I don't know that I would have the energy to do this every week. I am tempted to try something like this for 2025. I like adding photos. I know it's something that's done often, but now that I've been experimenting more with it, I'm kind of seeing why people like to memory keep with photos, and I think I might implement this in some way. I don't know if it would be in the Cousin or if I would use like an insert for it, but it is something that now that I've experimented with it, I think I would like to do something like this in the future. By now I know that staying consistent in my weekly or just staying consistent in any of my journals or planners only happens when there's minimal setup involved. So for that reason, although I loved a lot of these ideas, if I were to designate the weekly pages for one of these things, I'd probably choose something that required very little setup. So like this doesn't require any setup. This doesn't require any setup, but something like this requires quite a bit of setup. This one required the most setup. And then this one, I guess, didn't require any setup, but it did take a long time to put together. So if I were to repurpose the weekly pages, and if I were to get a cousin and I were to repurpose the weekly pages because I'm tracking my schedule in another way, I would probably go with something like this or like this, because it's not really time bound, and I would probably do this spread or maybe this. I'm really tempted by both of these. I would love to know, out of these different ideas, which was your favorite spread out of the ones that I experimented with? And I would love to know if you have any additional ideas on how I could play around with these. I'm gonna have a lot of empty spreads between now and the end of the year if I continue to use this weekly supplement, which is the plan right now. So I would love to continue playing around with different spreads and just have fun with this book, because I'm still using the back pages for notes, and it'll make me sad if I leave all of these weekly pages blank. So maybe at the end of the year, I'll do another check-in and flip through of all the different spreads that I've tried, because I would like to fill the rest of these out. All right, well, if you're still here, thank you so much for sticking around until the end. I appreciate you so much, and I will see you soon in the next video. Bye!